All right, we're off. Hello, this is Zoe Routh, and this is the second webcast in the series of COVID Culture Conundrums. Very excited to be here with you today. Thank you for everybody who is making time and space in your diaries to be here live. And if you're watching the replay, to actually watch the replay. Good on you guys. Culture is one of the most important conversations we can have as leaders because it's the only thing that delivers on strategy. Yes, we need strategy and we need to do that well, but if our culture sucks, doesn't matter how good our strategy is. And COVID is having impacts, as we all know, whether it's on our mental health or well-being, our focus, our ability to focus, our ability to get people engaged in the work that they're doing from far-flung places. So our topic today is on connection in the time of COVID, a little throwback to love in the time of cholera, something similar to that, I guess. What I found in doing the research for this particular series is that a lot of the fundamental principles when it comes to managing culture and people apply during COVID. And that COVID casts an interesting shadow, but doesn't derail what we normally would do from a cultural point of view. So some of you are finding we're covering the fundamentals, and that's good to go back to the fundamentals when it comes to addressing culture issues. And there's particular tweaks that we might go along the way that we need to emphasize more because of the COVID situation. Most especially the whole idea of having hybrid teams, those who can go to the office and those who are remote or those who are all remote. They had no plan originally this year to do that. Some are winners and some are losers on that. Julie and I were just having a conversation before we hit go about that some people are just loving lockdown and isolation and others are not. So if you're an introvert and IT person, like my friend's son in the UK, he's having the time of his life. He's so happy to be at home in his own space, doing his own thing. And others who are extroverts, maybe not so much. We miss the hugs, the interaction, the dynamics, the interplay when you bump into people and have these unplanned conversations. So we got to deal with all of that. Okay. So a couple of things to cover off as we get started. I want to address a couple of the Q&As that came in from the very beginning. If I don't hit your question as we go along, don't worry. I will absolutely get back to every person who responds to the questions, either through this forum or one-on-one. So sometimes the questions that you pose don't necessarily fit to the content and are not necessarily tailored to everybody else. But here's a couple I thought were specific enough to everybody, common to everybody, that's what I meant to say. The first one is how to keep people engaged remotely. This is a common theme, I've heard this. Workforce was face-to-face and now is remote and people are bummed out. The key tips, Tyson, you've just come in. Could you please mute yourself? We can hear your background, that would be fabulous. Maybe I can just mute you, I'll mute you. You are muted. Okay, there you go. The key tip there, it goes back to the fundamentals of managing the spiral and moving up the spiral. So if you're doing all the key actions around moving up the spiral, that'll help address some of that, how to keep people engaged, whether you're remote or not. The core ones, though, I think that are especially important for remote workers who weren't planning on being remote is they need to have something to look forward to. And this is really hard because if you can't go anywhere, you can't travel anywhere, and you had these wonderful plans and doing all these wonderful holidays and they're all shortened, there's still a sense of grief and frustration and despair around that. So having something else to look forward to is really important. And you have to work exclusively and explicitly with your teams to help them to develop that. And it could be, well, I know you wanted to go to France, that's not happening. So what else could you look forward to around now? And maybe it's a simple thing like a weekend where you get some plants and you plant a garden if you can. It could be as simple as that. Something small, tangible, nitty-gritty that you can do, looking forward to in your personal life. And in your professional life, it could be something that you're going to celebrate together. Maybe you're going to have a special afternoon where all you do is you're going to celebrate your career wins, and it's going to be a show and tell or a share and tell session. And that's something to look forward to. And as we talk later on today, some of those that are generated from the ground up are the most important ones. So something to have look forward to is really important. The second point around this one is celebrate small wins. Yeah, that's so important. If I just pulled up my strategic plan for 2020, and my business mentor said, "Oh, we were so young and naive back then." It's like, well, of course, we didn't know a pandemic was coming. And it's kind of funny and not funny to look at what we had in mind for this year, because obviously we had to wipe half of it off the table. And yet, if we look at the small wins we have had, it's been awesome. So I think if we do that, the small wins are really important to celebrate. And too often we just gloss over them and keep focusing on what's next. The third piece, which is such an important one, I think I say it multiple times in different ways, or maybe say it the same way, is make progress visible. This is so important. So whatever way that is, it could be a milestone map, like a chart that you draw out. You're like, we're here, and then our next milestone is here, and then our next milestone is there. That'd be great. So Courtney just finished a 12-month program, or 12-month report, a publication. Wouldn't it be amazing? I'm not sure if she did this or not, if you had little mini milestones to work on as you worked your way through that. In the strat plan I pulled up for 2020, I had my project milestone map for People Stuff, which is my latest book. And it's so nice to see that we progressed each little bit through that. Our next milestone is to get the audiobook done, which is sitting on my table, not doing anything right now. So I've got to pull my finger out and get that done. So having little milestone maps to show that you are eking your way forward is a really useful way to keep people engaged. So those are the three core ones: how to keep people engaged, remote working or not remote working, but especially remote working. Okay. Here's a question. Culture seems to handle COVID issues for a while because people are running on adrenaline, and then slippage in culture over time. How do we prevent this or address this? This, I think, pertains to this spiral a little bit. So last week we talked about that. There's fallow, there's productive, there's flourishing, and then we go back to fallow if we're managing things well, to rest and recuperate. So if there's a little bit of slippage, it could be time for a fallow period, a period of reflection and planning, as opposed to thinking that things are going terribly south into putrid, which was the other one. So understand that that's happening potentially. And also we're going to look at energy leaks, which can be a cause of moving into putrid zone, and also the rules of moving up the spiral, which is coming up next. Okay, one more question is, how do we get all people to participate in the culture? Some people don't. They just turn up and do their own little thing and that's it. The key response to that is to look to the systems that you have in place as opposed to the personality. So the easiest thing is to say, well, that's them. They're just not sociable. That may be partially true. And it's likely that your systems are not working for you if you want to create a really engaged, wholesome culture. It's probably some of the fundamentals are missing. Things like having a results map, which is where you have all the results of the organization as different departments mapped out and showing how they feed into each other. When you have a picture like that, which shows how the different areas all support and integrate for this common purpose that the organization has, it's harder for people to feel completely disconnected because there's a picture of where they sit in there. And then you can highlight codependencies, interdependencies, and cause-effect outcomes. So if somebody just does their own work and doesn't have a sense of urgency that their colleague does who's waiting on their work, this is one way of highlighting that. So results map is a key piece there. Overwork is another one that can create silos, which leads to disengagement. So people go into silos when a couple of things: their systems don't encourage interconnection, and two, they've got so much on their plate, they just don't want to lift their head up to look at what anybody else is doing because they feel so overburdened with what's going on. So that's another red flag to look out for. Okay. And you might need to develop personal relationships between those people who don't want to be engaged. The more you know about them, the easier it is to be interested and get them interested back. You might want to think about this. If people are not getting engaged in the culture, they may see themselves as captain of their own ship. And what you need to do is get them traveling as a cohort of ships in a what are they called? Armada? Is that the right word? Yeah, armada. A fleet of ships in an armada. So they can be captain of their own ship in their own unit. And are they still sailing together with one war campaign in mind? war isn't always the best metaphor, but in this case, I think it works. Like, are we all sailing in the same direction, even though you're running your own ship? And if so, we need to be mindful of what the other ships are doing around us. It's another little metaphor you can play with. Okay, so those are a couple of the questions I wanted to address at the starting point. Now, to your homework, running your culture compass. Did anybody, let me just put you in gallery view so I can see folks here. Did anybody go ahead and play with their culture compass with their team? Put your hand up, your physical hand up, if you did. Sort of, Kasia says. Everybody's like, no, too hard. Too hard, didn't have time, not a priority, or versions of that. Okay, so I will touch base on this because it is still important. And let me just pull up the culture compass. Because it is one of the, not having an effective culture compass really does have a major impact on your business. So the elements are pretty straightforward. Values are things that we care about, what's meaningful to us in terms of how we do our work. Purpose is knowing who we help, and that makes sense from a whole bunch of stakeholder engagement reasons. Qualities, now this is the big kahuna that often teams neglect and is so important. This is how we agree to behave with each other. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And during these COVID times, probably we have to renegotiate that part in particular. As an example, I was talking to a leader, and when I spoke to him, he's like, I just had this weird interaction with a staff member. And they said, oh, I can't take your call right now. I'm just at the gym. And so my client said, okay, I'll call you back. Put the phone down. He went, is that normal? I don't feel comfortable with that. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's work time hours and she's at the gym. Is that normal? Is that acceptable? It's COVID times. Can she manage her time flexibly? So he was all torn up in a knot about it and felt uncomfortable with it because his expectation was that she should be available during work hours to address client calls. And yet, if there's no agreed boundary around what people do during their day at home, working from home, some people can't leave their home to go to the gym, so that's never going to be a challenge. But for those who can, is that acceptable? Maybe yes, maybe no, depending on your work context. In any case, it needs to be discussed. So this, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable conversation is really important if you're trying to renegotiate how we do COVID, how we do work from home situation or a blended work environment. Sometimes you won't know what is and what is not acceptable until you bump into them, like this client did around taking that phone call around the gym thing. It's like, okay, that's not working. Let's talk about that. So it doesn't have to be they're a slacker, though some of us can jump to that conclusion easily. Oh, they're taking time off during the day. Well, maybe it was the best time to go because they know that normally it's a dead time during the workday. They never get any calls usually that way. That's the qualities piece. And the fourth one is results. What do we do? And how do we know which results we're producing? It needs to be measurable, tangible, visible. You know, you need to be able to see it, hear it, touch it, feel it, taste it sometimes. And when you have that clearly articulated, it gives a great clarity to what people are doing. Okay, so FAQs I get when it comes to the culture compass and, oh, where'd you go? Here we go. When it comes to the culture compass and how to troubleshoot it, is that you actually need, when you do it, A, and B, refer to it. There's no point doing that exercise if you don't actually bring it into play in discussion with your team. So that's pretty important. The second one is make it visible. So don't just hide it away somewhere in your computer, print it out, bring it to your meetings, showcase it in some way. So make it a fundamental aspect of how the team engages with it. And it needs to be cascaded through the organization. So depending how big your organization is, there needs to be a culture compass for the executive team, the board and executive needs one, and each team needs their own version of that with some common threads leading through. So make organizational values, and then each team might have a subset that are particular to them. And definitely will have different stakeholders potentially, and probably different results. qualities in terms of how people interact with each other, and maybe common themes, but maybe specific to that each individual team. So each team needs to have their own culture compass as long as it comes back to the main one for the organization. And this is the other really, really important piece. So once you do a culture compass and you want to have a discussion with your team after, like 2 weeks after you've done it, after you've done the culture compass with them, you want to say, how did we go? Especially if people have had a history of not working well together. Don't start with call each other out because people will be defensive. You want each person to own, like, how did you go honoring your role in the culture compass? Have you shown up as you said you would, and the commitments to that? And you get everybody to self-evaluate. That prevents them from getting defensive in a potentially awkward conversation. So there's a whole tip sheet on Culture Compass that was part of your People Stuff Toolkit when you signed up for the Magnetic Leader, my newsletter. If you don't remember that, or you haven't seen it, email me and I can get a copy of that to you. So some tips on the Culture Compass. It's also part of Loyalty, which was also part of the People Stuff Toolkit. Okay, now, where was I with this stuff? Okay, points of failure. Here we go. Points of failure when it comes to the culture spiral. Let's get into that. That is from our last session. So we're playing End the Cliffhanger right now. Points of failure in the culture spiral. Overworking, I mentioned this already. So overworking drives people into silos. And this can, if we skip the fallow stage in the spiral, which is the reflection, what did we learn, what are we going to plan, we can fall into this trap, and that can push people into putrid stage pretty quickly. Too much task focus is another point of failure, which means if we spend too much focus on task, results, and strategy and not balancing it with things like recognition, celebration, and building team dynamics, we're going to burn people out. We're going to tap too much of their dopamine, their cortisol, their adrenaline, and their endorphin system without rebooting the serotonin, oxytocin biochemicals, which come from the relationship-oriented processes that we talked about: recognition, celebration, and team dynamics. So we definitely need to balance task focus with people focus. No culture compass. You don't have that. It's definitely point of failure because you got nothing guiding you. It's just going to be this organic mess of culture that can sometimes arise and work well and sometimes not. So having something deliberate you can hold yourself accountable to is important. No agreed boundaries for work from home. I just mentioned some story that's related to that. So some of us, we're into 6, 7, 8 months of COVID experiences. It's still okay to have a conversation with your people around what's acceptable, what's not acceptable around the work from home experience. Slippage. Somebody raised that as a question. Slippage is when we lower the standards or we let the standards slip. And this will come again when we talk about leaks in your culture. When we start to let little things go by because we're too tired, this is a cascade effect. And this can cause a definite point of failure in your culture spiral. So we need to be vigilant that we don't let standards slip. And standards, as when we talk about them shortly, are things like, it could be even attire. You know, we had stories throughout this whole lockdown of people showing up to Zoom meetings in scruffy tops and sometimes not wearing anything, thinking their camera was off, things like that. So slippage in attire is one sign, and we'll talk about the others in just a moment. Not developing leaders. Oh my goodness. So leaders and managers are critical points of failure in a culture. And if we don't develop their people skills and their thinking skills, then the whole system is doomed to be stuck at whatever level the leaders and managers are at. If we want progress in evolution and finesse and sophistication in how we deal with people and how we deal with our strategy, then absolutely this needs to take place. And we need to develop not only their skills, but their point of view, their perspective. So being able to handle complexity is pretty critical here. And the last one is blaming personalities, not systems. It's so easy for leaders to say, that's not working over there, that little huddle of irritating people because of their personalities. Often it's the systems underneath that are causing all the drama. So we need to look at all the systems: remuneration, recognition, promotions, delegation are some of the key hot ones that we've got that cause problems. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, so now there's rules for moving up the spiral. Yeah, that's right, there are rules. I'm not one to be a huge rule follower, but these are important rules. So let me launch the poll, and your job in this is to tick the rules that you have in place. And I'll just walk you through all of them. So I'm launching the poll now. We have a culture compass in place and use it to check interactions with the team. If you have that in place, yeah, go for it. You've got that rule going, put it in place. The next one is we have measures for culture. Oh, and it cut off the whole sentence. And we check it monthly. So a lot of people they do culture engagement surveys and they do it once a year or once every couple of years. It's not enough to understand where your culture is going. You need to have a monthly cadence of check-ins. It could be mini polls with a longer survey or engagement check once a year, but checking it monthly is super important. We celebrate progress as well as outcomes. So that's making progress visible. That whole concept of, do we know how we're going against the broader plan? Or are we just measuring the lag results instead of the lead indicators? Number 4 there, which again cut off my text, very irritating. We recognize and show appreciation for each other, for others. We recognize and show appreciation for each other. And this last one, leaders and managers undertake professional development to develop their skills and their perspective is the missing word there. Developing their skills and their perspective. Okay. So if you have those in place, you can tick them. Okay, and I'm gonna give you 30 more seconds to look at that, digest it, and then we will close the poll and I will share the results. Okay. Okay, and I'll answer your question, Courtney, in just a moment. Okay. All right, here we go. We're going to end the poll and we'll see what we got on the showcase here. All right, so not that many folks have a culture. Oh, share results. Did I test share results? Here we go. So you guys can all see this. Let me just take a screenshot so we don't lose that. Not many have a culture compass in place. Easy thing to do. So make sure you get that done. We have measures for culture and check it at least monthly. Again, that's a trickier thing to get done and important. You celebrate progress as well as outcomes. I'm very pleased to see as many of you have ticked that as you have. We recognize and show appreciation for others' efforts. Yay, that's a lot. Most people are doing that, which is awesome. And then most of you are getting professional development, or the leaders and managers are getting professional development. So that's good news. So quick wins, get a culture compass in place. That's a super easy one for you to help put some boundaries around some of your experiences there. Okay, let me answer Courtney's question. And we'll move on to the next piece here. She says, when is it okay to call out that personalities are affecting culture? E.g., groupthink, where there's a lack of diversity of personality types. Okay, so groupthink, lack of diversity of, it's not just diversity of personality, it's off diversity in all senses of the word. Diverse backgrounds, diverse gender, diverse cultural experiences, diversity of cognitive processing, so diversity of thinking strategies, diversity of behavior preferences. That kind of diversity is super important. So that's less about personality and more about lack of diversity and across a whole bunch of dimensions. So I think my response to that is actually seated in your example, is that the lack of diversity causes the challenges. The groupthink thing is really a problem. And biases do come up in culture all the time like that, where we just sit around the table and we're all kind of look the same. Because naturally, one of our natural biases is that we feel most comfortable with those who look and sound like us. And we naturally are wired to distrust people who are not look like us and don't sound like us. And we actually have to work actively to overcome that. How do we do that? The best way is getting to know people individually, and to challenge our recruitment processes. So how do you call that out? I like to look at people's websites and I always go to the executive, well, I go to the board to see, do they have pictures of their board and executive on their website? And if they do, I have a look. What do the people look like? Does it look like a bunch of M&Ms? Fantastic. In terms of that's just visual representation of diversity, or is it all like monochrome? So two things will tell me. If there's no pictures of people on their website, it's usually a culture issue right there, potentially. And B, if it's not like a bunch of M&Ms, then we've got some potential problems seeding there. Now, you can also have people who look the same and sound the same and have a huge amount of diversity. So things are not always as they seem when you look there, but it's a typical one. So I know that I'm up for a challenge if I've been invited to do some culture stuff and it's just all monochrome, whatever that is. Okay, so I'll be curious to see, Courtney, if that's helped at all with your question. Just pop it in the chat box if it hasn't. We can have a conversation. I can see you smiling there. Does that help or not? Yes or no? Come see, come sa. I think you have it's really complex question you're asking there. Probably needs more context is what I'm guessing. Yeah, okay. We might have a side conversation about that to dig into some more specifics. Okay, awesome. Rightio. Let's get into the myths around difficult people. The complainer, the slacker, the leech. So in the chat box, question for you is, what kind of difficult people do you have in your culture right now? It could be the complainer, the slacker, the leech, or something else. So let's just get a little snapshot in the chat box to see what you actually do have. Feel free to pop in there what your particular people challenges are. Difficult people or difficult behaviors is probably a better word for it, though we tend to default to difficult people. Okay, avoidance and passive aggressive. Oh, okay. Okay. Complainers, not being accountable for their own work. Okay. Complainers and quiet ones, inconsistent performers, people who override others. Oh yeah, talk over others, tend to drive too harshly, I guess, forgetting about personalities and personal struggles. Okay, so insensitive. Complainers, blockers. If it's hard for me, it should be hard for you too. Okay. Complainer, resistor, not thinkers. What to be told, what to do, live in the past. Okay, awesome. What we're going to do is I'm going to pop you into chat boxes, and before I share my point of view, you're going to get each other's point of view on this. And your question is, oh, got some Raj coming in. Just hang on a second. The question for the chat box is, how have you dealt with the difficult personalities in the past? And specifically, complainer, slacker, leech. Complainer, slacker, leech. How have you dealt with complainer, slacker, and leech previously? And did it work or not? You might have dealt with it, but it didn't work. Okay. And then we come back, we'll cherry pick some of your key ideas. So you might want to nominate someone to report back. And then I'll share what I've got. So between all of us, we'll have a nice compilation. So Brenda's got to ditch out for a couple minutes. All right. So I'm going to put you in chat box and breakout rooms. And you'll have 10 minutes. Okay. All right, off you guys go. I'll just check that everybody's got somewhere to go to. Okay. 10:44. Oh, pause, stop recording. Awesome. Okay, I'd love to hear a share. So first group was Jamal, Michael, and Tristan. Who is your nominated representative?
Jamal nominated me, and the nomination was carried almost unanimously, apart from my vote.
Fantastic. Michael, what have you guys got to say? How do you deal with complainers, slackers, and or leeches?
We went through all three of them, one after the other, and then I think we went in a general discussion at the end. We were sort of talking about how you could deal with all three of them in the one way in some respects. That if you're dealing with all of them as with clear expectations and clear goals and clear deliverables and deadlines and quality, it actually calls out a lot of those behaviours in the process. So going backwards individually, for the leech, if we were talking about people who were not accountable or who pushed work onto others or who sold, say, my work as theirs, Jamal made a great point to say that you really need a public forum to generate that transparency. And if you're calling that out in a meeting to say, okay, as a group, we need to deliver A, B, C, D, E. Your job is to deliver A and B. We'll talk about that next week. And that sort of organisation and structure stops the slippage, and it stops the people dodging accountability, because they have to outline clearly what they've done, and they've been given a clear view as to what was intended to be delivered. The other thing is also to set good quality individual goals for those sorts of people as well, and it helps you to sort of lifts the overall standards up if they can do that. For the complainer, we spoke about that as obviously that person is almost always negative, very rarely positive. They can have a very significant effect on the team environment and culture because of that. And again, we figure to set that person on the right path is really about making sure that they are got a clear role, delivering to a certain standard, and then if they want to have a complain about the how and the where, that's fine, as long as their work quality is okay. We can kind of work around that a little bit. The slackers, we had a little bit more trouble with that one, because I guess in my view, most people don't deliberately turn up to do a bad job at work. That's really unlikely, but some people do a better job than others. And I think we had a discussion about the merit of small teams against large teams, and someone who is a slacker, there's nowhere to hide in a small team, but you can hide in a larger team. And again, we spoke again about tangible deliverables, tangible deadlines, tangible quality, and then if it's got individual responsibility attached to it, then the slacker can find it hard to hide from that. So I guess that summarizes our 10 minutes in a couple of minutes.
A+ gold star, guys. That was really good. Fantastic. We'll see. Now, the second team has the harder time because they got to fill in the blanks if there are any blanks to be filled in. So we'll see how we go. Josie, Julie, and Raj, who is your nominated spokesperson?
I am Zoe. It's Julie here. We spoke about setting up a mutual agreement at the very beginning with each member of the team and writing down what their responsibilities are and getting them to sign that agreement. Raj talks about that quite a bit, and he's put that into place in his workplace. And then we also spoke about giving the complainer, the leech, the slacker, whatever type it is, the opportunity to be involved and raise their concerns because they want to be heard, seen, and they want to have some power. So Josie was talking about having an informal meeting. Usually the manager will contact the person or follow up after the meeting and check in, and also do other things like going for a walk, having a meeting, standing up, or a walk. Unfortunately, we can't do that in Melbourne at the moment. We're all isolated, but there's other opportunities to think about things outside the box.
Okay, awesome. I think you're right. So that's a common theme with the complainer. They just want to be heard, is giving them opportunity to be heard. And we'll see if we can fine tune that a little bit. So thank you very much, guys, for sharing that. Brenda, Grazia, and Cassia. Who's speaking? Cassia.
That would be me. So we talked about the complainer and the leecher. They were the ones we were most experiencing. I think everything we talked about was quite similar to what's already been said. So I won't go into heaps of detail, but we generally talked around that while they're presenting different behaviours, the strategies to working with them could be quite similar. And we felt that, and I think most people have brought this up already, one was around obviously, build rapport with them, get to understand them, get to really know what the issue is to why they're showing this behaviour. And that then it would be around sort of communicating them, ensuring that you were communicating, your communication style was matching their communication style, and setting expectations. We probably went a little bit on a tangent and really got stuck on what happens when these people just don't change. They just don't want to, or they try, but they keep falling back on habits. And if you've come into a team that's already established and the team lets people be the leecher, be the complainer, we kind of got stuck there on like, what do you do? Because in practice, all of these strategies sound great. You can put a lot of things on paper and you can reset expectations and have great conversations. But what happens if you just don't get the change you need, the outcome you need? What do you do then?
It sounds like lack of consequences for following through. So that, I think that's where you need to have consequences for if we don't follow through with this, and being able to be prepared to follow through with that if you can. Sometimes it's the systems create the complacency or the ability to fall back on those. And I think you may have to have a look at what are the systems that are enabling that behavior in the first place. So I think there's aspects to that can be looked at. And then some people, will default to, I can get away with it. And so I will. In which case my strategy as a manager is contain and isolate as much as possible, so that there's no room for them to hide. There's no room for them to disperse their negativity if you can. So some of these answers are contextual. Like it really depends on what the setup is of the team and the culture, and how and which levers we can play with, I guess. But I think that's important to acknowledge that, we can take the best intention in terms of dealing with people. Like most people want to do a good job at work, as Michael said. I agree with that. And then there's those who if they can default to doing as little as possible, will. They're not that many, but they do occasionally appear. So sometimes it's that specific bent. More likely is the systems are enabling it. And we need to have consequences that are real, that prevent people from doing that. So another contextual complex one. So thank you for raising that. That's really good. Last group, Carrie, Courtney, and Tyson. Who is your nominated spokesperson?
Do you want me to be, guys? Yeah, okay. So just a couple of things I'll add because a lot of people have already said. some of the things that we talked about. But with the complainer, we very much talked about all that, like listening. And I suppose I've been a manager for a while, so just to let somebody hear, I'll be heard, sometimes can stop it from going anywhere, because they've been heard and they're happy with that, and they'll walk away and then they'll get over it and move on with it. Quite often, I usually try and get the complainer to be part of the solution. So, okay, so what's happened? You know, how can we do this better? How do you think it could work better? Go away and have a think about that and get back to me, and let's have a chat about it. And if it's a good idea, let's take it to the team. And so, yeah, so I involve them instead of, I try not to come up with the solution, although it's hard sometimes, I try not to. With the slacker, I probably spent too much time talking on that because I'm experiencing that. And it's probably the hardest behaviour to manage, I find. But again, one of the things because I've got, so it's in my team, there is that person that behaviour really does stand out. And I do get a lot of complaints about it, but what I try to do is, and some of the stuff I can work with, but other stuff I don't. Sometimes it's a bit like the tittle-tale gossiping stuff. So I try and involve the person. When you talk about how can you change one person in the team who's not performing, but it's pretty obvious to the rest of the team, if individuals come to me and talk about that, then I ask them if they're prepared to tell them what they're telling me. And if they are, fantastic. If you need support to do that, I'll do it with you. And I've set up a few different meetings for that purpose. I've set up a monthly meeting between two people that do the same job, just to give a forum for that discussion to happen, not in the big team, but with individuals especially with one individual that's being impacted more, and support that. And I usually don't get too involved. I'll let them talk about it, and then I come in and reflect what I'm hearing. So there's little strategies you can sort of pull out to manage it, but it is a tough one. And ultimately, the last thing that you do with a consistently non-performer that's not doing what their job description says is what Zoe said. Work development plans, that's their performance plan that gets managed tightly, that gets reviewed, that gets feedback. And if people aren't really doing their job consistently, then you go down the performance management measure, which is really time consuming, extremely time consuming, but sometimes you just have to do it.
Thank you, Carrie. That was awesome. Fantastic insights and contribution. I like your strategies. It's always wonderful to hear about people's experiences, as painful as they might be around some of this. Some really great insights from the teams. I want to add a few pieces that will help flesh it out even more around the complainers, leeches, and slackers. So myths, some myths. Complainers are negative. It's a myth, maybe. They're not always. They could be canaries in the coal mine. I think it's important to consider their complaints like that. They could be guardians, those who are saying, hang on a minute, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's some good things that we can do instead. And they can play the devil's advocate piece. So be careful that your complainers aren't playing that role, because you don't want to get rid of them. They can have a useful one. As many of you mentioned, they need responsibility and autonomy often. So careful, check to see whether they have enough responsibility and autonomy. And everybody concurs. They want to be asked for their contribution. They want to be heard. So ask them for a solution, ask them what they would do to make things better. So I always like to put complaints back on the other person. Say, you don't like it, what can we do instead? And see where that will go. Second myth, slackers are lazy. On the rare occasion, that's true. Largely, slackers lack clarity. And a lot of you talked about this. So more specific on role, direction, motivation, inspiration, accountability. Sometimes they lack skill as well, and they mask the lack of ability by just surfing around the edges. they appear lazy, but really they don't actually have the skill to do the job. So that needs to be something to be checked in with as well. So what to do with them: do a skills assessment for possible training, create agreed goals, targets, etc. with them. Highlight where they are and where they connect to the team organization and purpose. So that's showing the connectivity and their consequences. That was what I was talking about with results mapping. And the last myth is leaders are leeches, are selfish. Leeches lack boundaries mostly. So a lot of you spoke to that. Give an inch and they will take a mile is generally what happens with leeches. So with this one, you can develop the team identity, reinforce the culture compass in particular, highlight interdependencies, and give effective feedback, or the tips that are there. So yeah, no doubt those kind of people challenges are pretty problematic. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left. I want to cover off on energy leaks, rituals, and we'll be done for the evening. So let me just share my screen here. Okay. Energy leaks. Now this little pun just had me in stitches. It's not even that funny, but I still think it's funny. Okay, so your energy leaks. Now with each of these energy leaks are the seeds of your solutions. So basically you need to do the opposite, except for this one. Slippage is often happens in the fallow time. As I mentioned before, your attire can go downhill. Civility is a little sign that things are slipping. So how rude are people with each other? And accountability. So these are things that you need to nip in the bud straight away. And we've talked about some of that today. Relationships are where you can get energy leaks around the productive cycle. Issues go unaddressed, there's no feedback loops, and you have clunky systems. That can all affect the productive phase. And here we have, oh, I can't see what that says. Here we go. In flourishing, communication is what can cause energy leaks. It could be infrequent, unclear, and dishonest. So it needs to be frequent, clear, and honest. And that will keep the spiral moving. If we're in putrid, some of the deflators that can keep things going badly: no praise, no recognition, no sense of progress. So we talked about some of those throughout the session there. So what you want to do is do the opposite. Make sure that those issues are addressed, and that can help prevent some of the energy leaks that you may be seeing there. Some of the rituals was the other piece I promised for this session. And this is going to be part of your homework for rituals. Rituals for belonging are what you can create from the bottom up. As an example, when I worked at Outward Bound, there was a ritual we had every morning at 8 a.m., at least for a long time it was 8 a.m., then they moved to 8:30. We had a morning meeting. So everybody who was on the national base had to be on base in the room 8 a.m. for the morning meeting. And the morning meeting was what's happening around the country with our programs, what are some issues that need to be addressed. We've got a visitor from such and such, just basically information sharing session to let people know what's going on in the organization. And normally I don't advocate for information sharing sessions. And yet this short ritual was a way of everybody feeling like they had a start to the day, that we're in it together, even though we all dispersed after that into different parts of the organization. It really did create a sense of community. And sometimes morning meetings were funny. Sometimes you had a little mini presentation for people. And it really kind of set the tone for the organization that no matter where we are across the country, we're in it together. That was excellent background music. So your homework is to discuss with your team, what are some rituals you can put in place to help generate that sense of belonging and inclusion? And it could be fun things like maybe at the beginning of each meeting, you do a 2 truths and a lie, just to get to know you kind of thing. Or maybe you'll have a weekly competition for best recipe tried for that week. Or maybe you have an Iron Chef competition. You can do it virtually as well. So you might have like, okay, for Thursday's catch up, everybody needs to have, muffins is the Iron Chef challenge. And everybody brings their muffin, even if you share it virtually. You could have a word of the day. I had another client have that implemented with their team. So that became the theme word of the day. Often on my programs, my experiential programs, I had people pull spirit cards or theme cards out of a pack. And that's the theme word for the day for people to think about and mull over. So that's your homework around all of that. Okay, so that's rituals. One thing I did want to cover is special opportunity for webcast attendees only. And some of these are helpful. So I put together this little package, 90-minute express virtual masterclasses are opportunities for you. One is feedback that works. It's often a problem. People don't know how to give effective feedback. So I've got a 90-minute express virtual masterclass I can run with you and your team. This is train the trainer, how to run a culture compass. So many of you don't have a culture compass. How do you actually facilitate that? This is a train the trainer. I teach you how to facilitate running a culture compass with your team. And engagement strategies for hybrid teams. So how do you get a hybrid team or even a whole work from home team engaged? So a 90-minute session for you and your team on that. Normally it's $2,500 each. I've slashed it down to $1,000 for each of those, not each person, but each workshop, each masterclass. So you can have as many people as you want in each of them, or $2,750 for the bundle. So if one of those appeals, you can have it for $1,000 for plus GST for your team, or get the lot. You have to, the rules are book by Friday. Oh my God, I bet you can't even see this, can you? I'm sharing my screen and you can't even see this. Oh my God. Duh. Let me try that again. Here we go. Here's the deal. Book by Friday, 5 organizations only. And that's the, whoop, that was the deal. Oh, I am not mastering the slideshow today. There we go. That's the deal. If you're interested, just email me. We can have a chat about it. But the offer expires on Friday and it's only good for 5 organizations before it goes back to its usual price. So your homework again is to get some rituals happening with your teams. And bonus one, because you haven't done it before, is have a look at your culture compass and get one in place if you can. All right, so it is 5:05. I'm going to wrap this up because we're 5 minutes late. Thank you so much for coming today and participating. I really appreciate it. If you have time, please jot in the chat box what was the key takeaway and most useful thing for you. And if you have to go, see you later. I'm hanging out here until everybody's gone. So if you want to chat, great. If not, ciao, bellas.